Hello, YouTubers. Alaska Prepper here. I'm going to try to make this one quick, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, Trump just did something that I think is great. And this is great news, not only for the U.S., but in my opinion, for the world. Trump refuses to adhere to global carbon tax on shipping. Many people reading this may not understand what an incredible impact it would have on your everyday standard of living if this goes through. The International Maritime Organization on October 17th, they were supposed to do some kind of a vote where they would introduce a global carbon tax on any vessels that I believe are over 5,000 tons. And it's only supposed to be like a 10% carbon tax. However, that 10% will easily multiply to the price of everything that you purchase, that you consume, going up, I would say, by about another 30 to 50%. And it will diminish the standard of living of not only every American, but pretty much everyone in the world. And why is that? Because whatever monies they collect, ladies and gentlemen, and whatever monies they've collected in the past for this thing that they call climate change has been squandered away. And I can prove that to you in one chart. Take a look at this. Demand for crude oil worldwide from 2005 to 2024, with 2025 being forecasted. What do you see when you see this chart? You see that all the way over here in 2005, the use of crude oil worldwide was 83.65 million barrels per day. I would say that the powers that be have been taking our money in the name of climate change for at least the last 20 years. And what's changed? What's changed to make the use of fossil fuel go down? Because they've collected trillions of dollars from the world in order to fight fossil fuel usage and to fight climate change. Well, what I see when I see this chart is not only all the money that they've collected, but take a look at this. In 2005, we only used 83 million barrels of oil per day as a world. But look at this. In 2024, it's all the way up to 104 roughly million barrels of oil per day. And it's projected that 2025 will end just a little bit higher. So remember, follow the trend. The trend is going upward. Does it make sense to you that all of the money that they spent, they haven't made any progress whatsoever? It reminds me of California with all of the money that they've spent on homelessness, but homelessness only keeps getting worse. Well, there's a price to pay, ladies and gentlemen, for all of this money that they've taken from us over the years. Take a look at this short clip, and then I'll explain to you why I included it in this video.
Every day I wake up wondering where I'm going to stay at night. Being that I'm 63 and I should be homed somewhere in a nice place with a nice bed, I wish every day that I could be out. So I do a lot of wishing. I wish I could find some place and cook a meal. And it's hard living here because I'm in my van because I'm limited to what I can do. So I've got a lot of dreaming going on. This is my house and my bed and my storage underneath, my ice chest, my clothing. My bucket is, just a 5-gallon. You have your plastic bags. You have a toilet seat, which I got at Walmart, and it is a toilet seat, a plastic. It works just fine.
This is the state of many elderly, and not only elderly, but many Americans right now, and I would venture to guess of many people around the entire world. Do you think it's going to make it better for her if there was a global carbon tax, making her life even more expensive than it is now? She's already having to live out of her car and poop, for heaven's sakes, in a 5-gallon bucket. Therefore, it seems to me that the people that these people say they're supposed to be protecting are the actual victims that have to bear the consequences of the people who are sitting behind a desk, signing papers, making decisions on the behalf of not only this nation, but the entire world. I don't often get political on this channel, but I'll tell you what, when I read this article, I was very happy that Donald Trump got elected to be our president because I could only imagine what would have happened if it would have gone the other way around. You already know that this carbon tax thing in the entire world would have gone through with someone else there. And it's why it's important that you educate yourself. Let me go ahead and tell you a quick story. Story time. You know, I always have to do this. All right, so for those of you that are new here, thank you very much for joining the community. But every once in a while, I like to tell a story. All right, so here it goes. I was doing rideshare here, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, and I came across a gentleman that was up here studying climate change. So I started to talk to him about it. And he says, oh yeah, the world is getting warmer. We have to reduce our emissions, our CO2 emissions. And everything he was telling me, I was pretty much countering back and forth with him. It was a great conversation. And I actually wished at the end of that ride that our ride would have been longer. But he was open-minded enough to think. And I asked him the same thing about the chart that I just showed you. And he says, you know what? I've never seen that and I've never been taught that. This is a PhD, a person with a PhD that came to Alaska to study climate change, yet it never came across his mind. How much oil are we using? How much have we been using? Has all of our effort and money spent actually made a difference on reducing the use of fossil fuels? And he says, you know what, I'm going to have to take a look at that. And then I asked him another question. I said, okay, then why don't we just go ahead and go over to natural gas? Why do we have to go to EVs and electricity and windmills, which are actually pretty detrimental to the environment? And he says, well, maybe we just don't have enough natural gas to power to power the country or to power the world. I said, I can't talk about the rest of the world, but I can talk about the U.S. You know that in the U.S., there's about 86 years worth of natural gas that is easily recoverable. The United States has enough dry natural gas to last about 86 years based on current production rates and recoverable resources. And he said, are you sure about that? I said, mister, just look it up. It's out there for you to find. It's that you've just never been told about this because you've been living a narrative that someone else wants you to live. And then I asked him, why are we in such a hurry to push something through that even you as a PhD have not been able to properly analyze? We have enough fuel in the US in many different forms in order to power ourselves so that we can take our time finding the right answer and getting the truth. That way we know exactly what we need to do towards the future. And I said, do you know that we have enough coal just in the US to power our nation probably for the next half of a millennia or so? And he said, what? Based on US coal production in 2022, there's of about 0.594 billion short tons. The recoverable coal reserves that we currently have just in the US would power us or would last us about 422 years. But ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't you think that a PhD would know this? They don't know this because it's not what the powers that be want them to know. And then we got into the discussion about the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Currently, the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere is about 426. And I started telling him, but do you understand that if the ppm of CO2 in the atmosphere gets below, I believe it's like 180 parts per million, that vegetation would start to die off and that pretty much humanity will no longer exist because we need photosynthesis in order to be able to stay alive, to eat, to have an ecosystem that would support us. And he said, well, 426 is actually more than double what you just quoted. I said, yes, but do you know that the parts per million that is optimal for the vegetation to grow at its best is close to 1,000 parts per million and not 426 parts per million. So where we're having food problems, food shortages throughout the world because of this or because of that, we are at the same time actively trying to reduce that one thing that actually allows us to prosper. And then, of course, I started talking with him about cycles. I started asking him, can you please explain to me why it is that hundreds of thousands, if not million years ago, we used to be warmer than we are now, where there was no industrialization or even close to the amount of human beings that are on the earth today. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy was a PhD, and he still is a PhD. He's just not here anymore because I was giving him a ride to the airport. But these are the things that are not being taught to the people that are responsible for helping to make or making the regulations and laws that are being passed today. Well, thank you very much, President Trump. I am 100% on your side with this decision that you've made and with what you've told the other countries that the U.S. would do should they go along with it. UN body votes to postpone decision on global carbon tax amid U.S. outrage. You don't know how happy it makes me to hear this. The United Nations body specializing in regulating global shipping voted on October 17 to delay a vote on the adoption of a proposed framework that will impose a global carbon tax on international shipping, a regulation the United States has strongly opposed. The proposed net zero framework would have required ships to comply with a global fuel standard for large ocean-going vessels of more than 5,000 gross tonnage, as part of an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the global shipping industries to net zero by 2050. Another thing that I asked the gentleman that I gave a ride to the airport was, do you know what percentage of the atmosphere is CO2? You would think that if you're a PhD and you're doing climate change research or greenhouse gas research, that you would know what percentage of the atmosphere that greenhouse gas that you're trying to eliminate so badly would be. So I asked him, do you know what it is? And he says, really, I've never really studied that. I haven't looked that up. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll reiterate to you, this was a PhD. This is what college and universities are doing to the people that are supposed to be the future of this nation and also of this world. All right. So I told him, I said, well, guess, what do you think it is? And he said something like, I don't know, 10, 15%. And I said, no, sir, it's not anywhere close to that. I said, you want to guess again? He says 10%. I said, no, it's 0.04%. 4/100th of a percent is CO2. And then he said, yeah, but how much of that is because of humans? I said, sir, because of humans, that comes down to about 0.0012, which equals 3% of 0.04. President Donald Trump said ahead of the IMO vote that the United States would neither support a carbon tax on global shipping nor adhere to the plan in any way, shape, or form. Good for you. That is so awesome. And he says, quote, I am outraged that the IMO is voting in London this week to pass a global carbon tax. I mean, that is ridiculous. There's 8 billion people on this earth, plus, and just a group of people can say this is what's going to happen to your life because we know better. He says, quote, we will not tolerate increased prices on American consumers or the creation of a green new scam bureaucracy to spend your money on their green dreams. And this is why I included that clip about that elderly lady that's been living in her car for more than a couple of years now. IMO has said that the framework due to take effect in 2027, if adopted, will be the first in the world to combine mandatory emission limits and greenhouse gas pricing across an entire industry sector. Do you understand what greenhouse gas pricing is? Do you understand what a carbon tax is? Ask Canadians, ask our brothers and sisters to your north and to my south. Ask them how this carbon tax is affecting their standard of living. And the Trump administration said, quote, the administration unequivocally rejects this proposal before the IMO and will not tolerate any action that increases costs for our citizens, energy providers, shipping companies, and their customers or tourists, the officials said in a statement. Quote, The economic impacts from this measure could be disastrous, with some estimates forecasting global shipping costs to increase as much as 10% or more. Well, AP, why is it that you say that prices for us, the consumer, is going to go up another 20, 30, even 50%? Well, ladies and gentlemen, because we live in a debt-based economy. Whenever people or businesses get something, they borrow that money to get A. And then they have to hold on to that A and pay interest. And then when they put it off on the next person or the next business that's going to get that A, let's go to B now, that business has to get money that they borrow to pay the A company. And it just keeps adding and adding and adding. So 10% very quickly turns into 20, 30, 40, or even 50%, depending on how many middlemen there are before it actually gets on the shelf and you buy it. They said the U.S. government was weighing possible actions against nations supporting the IMO proposal, including potentially blocking vessels registered under those countries from entering U.S. ports, imposing visa restrictions on maritime crews, and imposing commercial penalties on ships flagged under nations backing the net zero regulation. This net zero proposition, ladies and gentlemen, is just a net zero dream. It is not going to net you anything. Actually, that's what it will do. It will net you, the consumer, the person trying to keep your head above water, 100% of zero. Do your own research. Go back and take a look at these geological charts that show you that we've gotten warmer before and we've gotten colder before and warmer. Just ask yourself this one question and then I'll leave it at that. You know that we've had ice ages in the world before, right? Ice age, and then it warms down, and then we have a time of prosperity, and then we have another ice age. It's just a cycle, right? Ask yourselves this question. Just go back to the last ice age, right? Which I don't know how many thousands of years ago it was. I can look it up, but I'll let you do that. Go back to the end of the very last ice age. I'm sure that there weren't 8 billion people on Earth during that time. And ask yourselves, what made it get warmer? Thank you very much for joining in today, ladies and gentlemen. God bless every one of you. I love you all. God bless America. I'm Alaska Prepper. I'm out.